What am I still doing here? I'm on vacation. I have no idea what I've been up to. Well, I know some of it. Hi, and welcome to Quilt Meets World, where we have adventures in piecing and joy. I'm Russ. Come on into my sewing room. Since I'm on vacation, I don't have particularly anything new to share because, well, this is being recorded before I went on vacation. However, a few weeks ago, I did a presentation with my buddy Stephen Bland of the Idiot Quilter at his virtual retreat. I decided that this would be a great time to do a replay of that presentation, since, not everyone was able to attend that event, and the reception of the presentation was overwhelming positive. So while I'm somewhere in Massachusetts doing who knows what, let's watch that presentation together.
Okay, Russ, we're all ready for you. So I'll let you introduce yourself and
But it's 2 minutes early.
I know. So you're a little anally retentive, aren't you? So this is Russ, everybody. Quilt Meets World.
Hi, everybody. So as Stephen said, my name is Russ. I started a YouTube channel late last summer called Quilt Meets World. Let me just share this because I do have an intro slide because, why not? So I'm going to be doing a presentation about why you don't want a long arm, but you probably do.
And Russ, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your voice is kind of fading in and fading out a little bit.
Let me check my audio settings in Zoom real quick. It's got the right microphone.
Okay. Well, you sound okay right now. So
okay. Well, if you have issues, let me know and I will speak louder.
Yeah. Okay. Go for it. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, you're good. I want to do a presentation on why you don't want a long arm, but probably do. I recently purchased a long arm, so this is a lot of, behind the scenes of what I was thinking about, trying to figure out while I was trying to figure out my long arm if I wanted it. A little bit about me. I am a computer geek for a local media conglomerate. It has been a lot of torture over the past year with our integration and purchase, but it's been a lot of fun. I have been quilting for about 14 and a half years. I think I said that earlier, and my long arm is about 4 months old for me. I first played with the long arm in 2007, so that's 6 years ago. And ever since then, I'm like, ooh, this will be fun to have. This will be fun to have. Until I realized, I don't have the space. I don't have the funds. How do I make this happen? So got a quick agenda. We're going to talk over a lot of stuff. If you have questions, you can feel free to interrupt me. If you'd like, it's going to be, a little bit of ADHD going on. So hopefully we can keep it on track. That's why I do the PowerPoint presentations. So I guess, before we even get to the whole long arm thing, a lot of people are like, what's quilting? I get this question a lot at work because they think it's a simple process. And then when I describe to them that, it's not just putting the top together, you have to stitch the layers together, and you could either do that by hand, you could do it by a sewing machine, you could do it by long arm. My coworkers are like, really? It's that much work? And everybody in this room knows, yes, it's that much work. A lot of times it's like trying to figure out how to get that quilting done. I can't tell you how many quilt tops I had made before I got my first one quilted. Just because, there's a lot of that. And If you want to do it on your domestic machine, you have to learn a lot with that. If you want to do it at the hand, you have to do a lot with that. If you want it long armed, okay, you got a credit card. That's the easiest way. So yeah, the various types of quilting, hand quilting. I love anybody who could do hand quilting, but that is not me. It's the whole needle and thread. I have enough time worrying about binding because I hand stitch my binding usually. On smaller projects, I'll machine bind it. But binding is about as far as I want to do with any type of handwork. But I love the results, and I know that hand quilting can take years in some cases. A lot of people do domestic quilting. It's a lot of fun. I have done a lot of domestic quilting. It's backwards for what most people's brains work because I call it you're moving the paper with a pen in front of you, a pen or pencil in front of you, whereas, a long arm is you're moving the pencil or pen on top of the paper. So you have to draw things backwards on your domestic machine. The big problem with domestic machines is the larger the project, it gets more and more difficult to wrestle it around because you've only got so much room in your machine. And then with a long arm, as I tell any of my coworkers, it is a sewing machine on steroids. They are significantly larger. You can get them in various size, various functionalities. And once you get to a long arm, it seems like the only limits are the size of your frame and your imagination. And, we all have a lot of imagination going on around us. But as I mentioned, my favorite way to quilt is quilt by credit card, or it was. It's the best. You get to pick out the design, the edge-to-edge design that you want on it. And depending on your long armor, it can cost like between 2.5 and 4.5 cents. So it's not a bad price in some cases, but as you get to the bigger quilts, people will be like, ooh, that's a lot. And they don't seem to want to invest in that awesomeness. A lot of quilt shops will have a resource list that can connect you with a local long armor. I know my local shop, they have just an entire page of people that they have themselves seen the quality of the work because they're not going to hook you up with somebody that they haven't seen their work. And then if you're working with a quilt by credit card, always make sure you know what you're getting into, all the rules, because some people ask for things to be pressed a certain way. Some people prefer their batting, so they'll give you an extra charge for that. So that's always a lot of fun. So the first question that I asked myself when I was going through this whole process was, can't I just use my domestic machine? I mean, it does stitch. It does. Okay, I use really 2 of the 713 stitches that it has, but it will stitch. So the answer to that is absolutely we can use our domestic machines. They are the best way to get smaller projects done. You have multiple options as well. You can do walking foot. If you are brave enough, you can use a ruler foot. You have your free motion foot. So any small projects, these are awesome to do on your domestic machine. Down here on the lower left-hand corner is a mug rug I made. It is 5 inches by 10 inches. There may be 73 pieces of fabric in that little bit of space, but there is no way that I would have wanted to try to put that on a long arm machine to be quilted. First of all, you don't have, you have so much room that you have to have for your backing fabric that unless you're putting dozens of mug rugs or something on a long arm quilt, it makes absolutely no sense to do something that big. So domestic machines, they are the best when it comes to doing quilting on small projects. You can do walking foot projects. These are a lot of fun because they give you that feel of straight line quilting. There's a lot of gorgeous straight line quilting projects that I have seen, and this is a very easy way to do it. You do want to use a walking foot and not your standard presser foot, because the walking foot will pull both layers, well, technically all 3 layers, together evenly, so you don't get any puckering with that. One of my first quilt projects, I didn't know that we needed to use a walking foot, so I was pushing the fabric through, and that didn't come out as pretty as I had hoped. It still kept people warm, but it would have been a little bit better if I had actually did a little bit more research and learned that I needed to use a walking foot. Free motion feet, these are a lot of fun. You have to drop your feed dogs, which most machines allow us to drop our feed dogs. And you can have artistic vibes going all over. There's a lot of fun with this. You do have to make sure you keep more of a steady pace through your free motion so that your stitches still look pretty even. But you can do very creative designs. Here we have some loop-de-loops and some meandering. You can make your imperfections look perfect using various loop-de-loops and squigglies, because if they don't know how you wanted it to look in your head, they're not going to realize that there's a mistake. So I do love doing some free motion quilting. We also have, rulers. You have to get a special foot, a ruler foot, and once you find one that fits your machine, some machines that you can buy them specifically, but if you can't find one specific for your machine, the company Westerly, they have ruler feet. You just have to know if you need a high shank or a low shank ruler foot, and they will help you figure out which one you need based on your sewing machine model. Doing ruler works, it gives beautiful results. It almost makes it look like it came from a long arm, and all you did was push it through your domestic machine. As you see here, there's dozens of motifs that you can use, and it's just a little bit of practice and following through. I will say that ruler work is one of my favorites. I'm trying to learn how to use the rulers on my long arm right now, because it just looks gorgeous, and you get perfect straight lines with your rulers, or perfect circles. I do like the randomness of pebbles and stuff like that, but sometimes I have a design in my head that I just want something exactly like that. And domestic machines, they are great. You don't have to do any additional cost with it, really. You're comfortable with it. And then the best part about a domestic machine, if you're going to quilt with your domestic machine, is you can tote it to classes, and you're learning on the equipment that you have. You don't have to worry about the idea of, well, if I learn on this type of machine, am I going to be able to transfer the knowledge that I learned onto my domestic machine? Because you are learning on the machine that you are comfortable with. But the other thing is, domestic machines aren't always great. The thing that I hate the most is basting a quilt sandwich. They take hours. And I've got even additional tools and everything to try to make it better, give me a better project. but basting is torture. The other thing that I have learned when I'm quilting on my domestic machine is I tend to make the motifs more dense. You're looking at a very small area of your quilt when you're doing the quilting. And since you're focused on a small area, you're trying to fill that small area instead of seeing how the whole quilt is going to look. And the worst part is if you're trying to do a big quilt. You've only got so much room in your throat space of your neck machine. You can do it. It's a lot of wrestling and pushing things through. I do have a friend that has managed to do queen size quilts on their domestic machine. They came out really nice, but I'm just like, I don't want to push that much fabric through. I have enough difficulty doing baby quilts through my machine. Trying to do something bigger is ridiculous. So then as we go for it is like, what's a long arm? And the thing that I like about saying with a long arm is that song from Annie Get Your Gun, anything you can do, I can do better. In many cases, that's true. I tell coworkers and everything that a long arm is basically a sewing machine on steroids. Mentioned that earlier. They can be as small as a tabletop model, which if you want to liken it, it's basically taking your machine, making it bigger so that you have the space to push around, but you're still moving the fabric instead of the machine. And then you also have the bigger machines with frames where you're moving the machines instead of the fabric. Again, the similar things you can do on both machines. So it's very much trying to figure out what you want and what you're ready for. As I was doing my research, the sit-down models, they are always the better priced models. Well, I don't want to say better priced, the more affordable set. And then this is basically anything that you can do on your domestic machine, you can do here. All the muscle memory that you've learned on your domestic machine, it transfers very nicely to a long arm, a sit-down long arm. The best part is the tables that they have are generally able to be fit into any room. Because you're just fitting that one machine on there, and then you need a little bit of wiggle room to hold your quilt. So if you don't have a ton of space, sit-down machines are usually where you want to go. The problem with sit-down machines is most people will just sit and associate them with, why can't I just do this on my domestic machine? And they end up collecting dust. So I've used the sit-down machine. It was not a fan just because of that same thing. Is I wanted to make sure, or if I could do it on my home machine, why am I going to spend all this extra money for a sit-down machine? The next option up is getting a frame. Doing this, this is where we switch from moving the paper underneath a pencil concept to you're actually moving the pencil over the paper. So you will be able to draw a little bit easier. They are lighter than you think because there's so little friction in the wheels. When I moved my machine in, I knew how heavy that thing was. And then as I'm driving it around, you feel almost no weight. So those are really awesome. It is a different muscle memory. So if you are accustomed to like pushing your fabric around, everything is now backwards from that as you are trying to move the machine around. You can use pantographs with it, which is a really, really awesome thing because sometimes you don't want to sit and try to figure out what type of design you want to put on your quilt. And instead, you can just say, Well, I'm going to do this edge to edge design. It should be fairly simple, and you just drive and follow the lines. Those are really awesome. And the best thing about the long arms with a frame is you can usually upgrade. So if you are looking at one model and it's in your price range now, but there are some features that you are looking for, make sure you talk with your dealer to say, hey, these are what I really want. This is what I can afford now. Will these options that I'm looking for be available for this machine as I want to upgrade? That is always important. You want to make sure that your path can get you to where you want to go, not necessarily where you want to start out. And then computerized systems. These are the ultimate upgrade. You can do virtually anything with them, and you can let the computer drive. If you have a sampler quilt, you can do an edge-to-edge design, but you can cut out the squares and let the squares be a different pattern. It's really cool. I get mesmerized just watching the machine go. When I got my embroidery machine 4 or 5 years ago, I would just sit and watch the embroidery machine because that fascinates me. And then now with my long arm, I will sit and watch the long arm, and it fantasizes. It's fascinating to me. You really do need to watch your long arm while it's going with a computerized system, because if the thread breaks or the needle breaks, it doesn't always tell you. I think it's just depending on some of the sensors that it has. So you can be accidentally ruining a quilt if you're not watching it. So don't think that a computerized system lets you set it and forget it, to go back to the Ronco days of infomercials back in the 90s. And long arms are great. You have a lot more throat space, so you have a lot more room to maneuver the quilt underneath it, or you have a lot more room to maneuver the long arm over the quilt. You get to move fabric or the machine depending on which way you want. They are a lot more powerful than your domestic machine. That's kind of important because sometimes we have to have a bulky seam. When you're running over a domestic machine over that bulky seam, you can have issues pushing the needle through. You could have issues, might even break a needle with a long arm. It can go through them. Obviously, it can also go through your fingers, so be very careful. Don't put your fingers near anything while the thing is moving. But that is a really awesome thing if you are doing a pattern that maybe has a lot of pinwheels that you couldn't spin everything well, and you have a bulky seam here and there. So they work really nicely until they're not great. They require a lot of room. The sit-down machines don't require that much room, but when you're looking at a machine with a frame, it's a lot of space. You need to have at least 2 feet around your frame just for movement. So if you've got an 8-foot frame, you need at least 11 feet side to side and like 6 feet front to back. So it does take up basically an entire room. Small projects, there's no point in doing a small project on a long arm unless you are loading a bunch of small projects on the same backing. They are really nice if you're doing a bunch of tabletop runners or placemats, because you can load them all up at the same time and pantograph quilt them at the same time. But if you're doing a one-off, you're going to want to do that on your domestic machine. So now's the big question of, how do I know if I want a long arm? Because that's always the hard part. You don't know if you want one. You think they look cool. You think that it might be what you want, but you're not certain. So if you don't know, try one. This picture was taken when I first tried my long arm, or tried a long arm in 2017. This one was with my mom's quilt. I had no idea what I was doing. A friend of mine had a long arm and said, "You can do this. It's not that difficult." And I was terrified for a second. But he let me play with it. He loaded the machine for me. He did everything that needed to be done, and he just let me drive. And that's when I kind of was hooked. There are many places that you could try long arm. Quilt shows and sewing expos and stuff. Those are usually the best. Everything's already set up and they want you to play. You can try the different machines. You can go to the Handy Quilter booth and try Handy Quilter. You can go to the Gamel booth and try Gamel. You can go to Bernina and try Bernina. So you can see which ones work better with your personality. You can see how they feel because different machines drive differently. The big thing that I tell people when they are playing is to be fearless. It is a big machine. It feels intimidating, but they smell fear. So you can tell the people who are just kind of afraid and are afraid that they don't know how they want to move. And then you can see the people who are just like, oh, whatever, I can play with this. This is pretty awesome. The big thing about the quilt shows, though, is don't let them sell one to you immediately, but do take their local resource options. They always have pamphlets because they have local people in the area that do sell them. Unless you 100% know that that's already what you want, let them do their sales pitch, but they're only going to tell you the positives. Your local quilt shop is also usually a good resource. A lot of them let you rent time on their long arms, and in order to rent the time, you need to take a class with them. Again, I'm telling people, be fearless. I did take a class a couple weeks ago just because I like to learn different people's techniques and stuff. And everybody, again, it was like, I'm afraid to touch this. And we just had to tell people, calm down, you're not going to break it. We're not going to let you break it. The important thing about this one, though, is the instructors are going to be teaching you how to use a long arm with the features that they allow you to rent. The reason why I say that is important is the local quilt shop, they will let you do freehand stuff, however you want it, or they let you use a paper pantograph on the bottom, on the back of the machine. And the paper pantograph did not work for me. My brain did not like that. If that was the way that I was taught to use a long arm the very first time, I would have said, I don't want a long arm. The reason why it didn't work for me is because the pantograph was looking down and off to the left a couple inches, and I'm following a laser to the left. So I have my hands in front of me driving the machine, but I'm looking to the left, and it just was kind of confusing me. And you don't get to see the end product until you're done. The initial aspect that I had of the long arm in 2017 with a friend of mine, he had a digital pantograph system on his Innova. I think it's called PantoVision. And you're watching the screen in front of you. You have your handlebars in front of you. So everything is directly in front of you, and you can follow the dot on the screen as you move everything around. That worked very well with me for pantographs. He didn't have computerized, so I couldn't play with that. And then a lot of quilt shops, they won't even let you rent for computerized systems because their resources are there to help you set up and get everything around. And at that point, if you're using the computerized system, you're basically paying the hourly rate to have them set up everything and turn on the computer for you. you're not really doing anything. So don't expect to learn how to use the computerized system from a local quilt shop or what features they are. They usually will show you, but they won't show you enough to let you do a lot of learning. The best thing to use is friends. If you have friends that have a long arm, they're the best, because you're always going to get an honest review from them. They will tell you what they love about it. They will tell you what they don't love as much about it. And their views are always going to be different than the people who are trying to sell you a certain brand of machine. There's also, features that one machine may have that another doesn't. Pantovision is one of them that I think is really important, because, like I said, I would not have even thought about wanting a long arm if I hadn't tried anything with Pantovision, because I don't have enough imagination all the time to decide what I want to have quilted on a quilt. So having something to follow is really nice, because it gives you those human imperfections, and you get to embellish the project that you're working on a little bit with a pantograph. When you're working with a computerized system and you want to do some embellishment and stuff, you can't really do that until after everything is done. So it's a lot more difficult to do. And then the other thing that people ask is, how much does a long arm cost? That is always the scariest answer that anybody hears. I just had 2 bathrooms remodeled in my house, and from what I understand, the MSRP for what I purchased is higher than the 2 bathrooms combined that I had remodeled. I'm not telling you those numbers because those scare people. You can generally get them at less than MSRP. Sometimes like a local quilt shop, if they are a dealer and they also rent the machines, they will take their rental machines and sell them at a bit of a discount. I managed to get mine from a friend of mine at a fairly deep discount, just because he was just downsizing from 2 long arms down to 1. So, and he knew that I was interested in one. The problem was I didn't have the space. At first, I didn't think I had the space, but thankfully I was able to get a smaller frame with it. So I can't do all the projects that I want, but I can do most of them. There are resources for your domestic quilting options, though. If you want to use your domestic machine, most quilt shops, they do have classes, and they are going to always be your best option, is learning from the experts. It's always a lot of fun, and you get to play. And as I tell people, be fearless. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, because they're just happy accidents. YouTube is another great resource, because there's a lot of inspiration out there. I love watching shows like Angela Walters, where you see some of the free motion quilting motifs that she's looking to do in her stuff. It is very inspiring, and if you watch enough, then it starts fiddling in your head of things that you want to be able to do. And then finally, you can just try it yourself. You have your machine. I think most machines come with a free motion foot, and most machines come with a walking foot. The roller foot is usually an extra cost, but you have everything that you need to play. And we all know you have the extra fabric. I've seen some people's, scrap piles. Take a 14-inch project or quilt sandwich and just play with it, pin it up and play with it. And the best part is, keep an album of your progress. You may not want to keep each individual 14-inch square that you're playing with and practicing quilting, but take a picture of it, because you can take that picture and compare it to 3 months from now, through 6 months from now, and see how much your skills have improved. And just to show you can do it, I'm going to show you some stuff that I think I've only shown one other person besides myself. Right here is my very first attempts at quilting. This was a class. And while I was in the class, I said that all of this was just a hot mess. And I took pictures of it and everything, and I shared it with my bestie. And he responded, "That looks really good." And I was about to say, "What do you mean it looks good? It all looks like crap." Until I realized, looking at it from a camera lens, everything looked better. I wasn't focusing as much on the blemishes. And the other important thing to realize is I'm using high contrasting thread. It's a green on white. That's going to show every little imperfection. If you ignore the little imperfections because you're using a blending thread, it's going to look even better. So don't think you can't do it. Like I said, this is my first couple sets. It was a class that involved ruler work and domestic designs, just doodling and stuff, and feathers. These aren't the greatest feathers, but you can see how I improved. The one that's pointing downward was my first. My second one was the one that's on the left and was a little bit better. And the one on the right is even better than that. And then the other set of pictures I've shared a little bit more is my first long arm experience. And this is where I want to tell you that people aren't going to notice your mistakes. You're using a blending thread and nobody's going to care. I can probably point out 15 mistakes on here if I really wanted to, but you can't see them. And all of this was hand done on a pantograph. And it is easier than it sounds as long as you're not showing fear. Fear is your biggest mistake when you're working with your sewing machine. But this is Mom's quilt, and this is always going to be my favorite quilt because there's so much of a story behind it. And I got to do the quilting on it myself, and I love this quilt. As you're thinking about wanting a long arm, there's a lot of things that you have to consider. The biggest thing is money. As I said, they're not cheap. You can get lower end models and then upgrade different things. But you got to just make sure that you are ready for the investment. Space, that's a lot of thing that you have to have available. Basically, you need a whole room, or you have to have a pretty large quilting studio. I was planning on building a studio extension on my house and then buying the long arm at that point. But when you get offered a price as good of a deal as it was, I couldn't say no. So I went around my house, measured every single room and said, can I fit it anywhere besides, nowhere? And as I said, with the smaller frame, I was able to fit it into my room. The other thing is, what is the return on investment? Long arms cost mucho dinero. And if you're only spending, $200 or $300 a year on finishing quilts, then it may not be worth the investment. In 2022, I spent about $1,400 quilting by credit card. And it's still going to take me a large number of years to pay that off by the number of quilts that I would finish. But, I have it set up and I have the plan, and I can now, instead of making a pile of quilts and sending them off to be done, I can get them done faster. Features are another thing that you need to think about, because you may not have the options that you want in your budget, but that's where the upgrade path comes. You may start with a machine maybe without the computerized system and upgrade to the computerized system. I think some machines you can start with a sit-down option, and then you can upgrade to a frame depending on which machines you buy. So that's always something that you need to think about. And then there are alternative options if you're not quite ready for a long arm. Your domestic machine, that, like I said, that's the best because you're comfortable with it. You know how to use it. You can practice all you want, and it's not going to cost you a thing except for a few scraps out of your stash. You could always quilt by credit card. Like I said, this has been my favorite way to quilt. It's best when you have a pile because I think the last quilt by credit card project I did, I dropped off 11 quilt tops. It makes it, more fun because you get a whole pile of quilts back and you can decide which order you want to put binding on and everything else. And it's also, supporting your friends or small businesses because, without those, we wouldn't have a community. And then there's a Grace Cutie frame. It's something that I learned something about, or I learned that it exists in the last 6 months. Basically, you can take a straight stitch machine, like a Juki 2010, I think it is, or something of that style, and mount it into the frame. And it's kind of like a miniature long arm. It gives you that feel. You can do your designs onto the quilt with it, but you're not spending all that money for a new machine and a big frame. I haven't used one yet, but it looked really interesting as I was doing research. So as I tell people, it's great to have a long arm, but you don't necessarily need to have one. They're a lot of fun, but you have a lot of price and space requirements that keep people from having one. But it's still cool to get one. Don't let anybody step on your dreams. This is the machine that I have. It's set up in what used to be my dining area in my house. It barely fits, but it's a lot of fun to now doodle on, and I've had a lot of fun, and I'm working on getting a couple quilts done in the near future with it. Mostly computerized that I'm going to be doing for quilts of my stuff. I'm not comfortable enough with my doodling designs. So do we have any questions from anybody?
I have two questions. One, what do you needles? Can you use regular machine needles?
You have to use needles specific to your long arm. They do have different sizes and they have different points. So like with my handy quilter, I have the standard ones. They have high-speed ones, I guess, for if you want to put your machine on zoom. And then they also have ballpoint needles if you're working with knits and stuff. So you do have different needles. They also still need to go in a certain way, but they don't have, like my machine, they don't have, this is the front, this is the back. So you have to know how you're putting it.
Okay. And my other question has to do with, can you do a doodle? And if you like it, is there any way of storing it so that you can replicate it?
I'm going to say no and yes. If you've already done the doodle, not easily. I know there are some computerized machines where you can kind of trace over that doodle, or you can even design your own pantograph if you want with various software. I haven't done any of that. I had a quilt that I had completed many years ago And the friend that I got the long arm from, he wanted to create a custom pantograph for it. It was a Legend of Zelda quilt, so based on a video game, and he wanted to do a custom pantograph that had themes from that video game. Unfortunately, time was never in his favor to make the pantograph, but it is something that he was able to do. He would just be able to draw the pantograph in some software. But I think you could also draw the pantograph by moving your machine and then straighten it up if you want. Again, it depends on the model. It depends on the software that you would have available with it.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay, Russ, I need to ask a question and I want you to think about it really well before you answer it.
Okay.
I know I could never have a long arm at home, but to be able to go out and rent one, then you're going to need to be able to take the time to set it all up, do the quilting, and take it all down.
Yes.
How much time are you then looking at to pay somebody to get a quilt done? Even if you knew how to do this,
So
do they do all the setup?
Yep.
yes, well, at my local quilt shop, if I go there to rent time,
Mhm.
they do this, like you bring your already pressed quilt
Right.
top, you bring your batting, you bring your already pieced back, so you have everything ready to go.
Mhm.
And they say that your time starts the moment that she starts loading the quilt on the machine.
Oh, but she does the loading.
Yes, she will do the loading. She will either do the basting or help you do the basting,
Okay.
depending on your comfort level with that. So there is a lot of the setup that she does for you. Again, this is still part of your time. And
Okay.
then when you're done with a row of the pantograph, she will
Mhm.
help you move the quilt forward so that you can work on your next line. So she does a lot of the helping to make sure that you get a perfect product as best as you can,
Okay.
depending on how you're following things. So
And then
she's there as your emotional support quilter.
okay, my next question is, would someone who is not able to walk honestly be able to handle doing the quilting on a long arm? I'm in a wheelchair.
That I think
transfer,
is a
that's
maybe.
it.
The reason why I say a maybe is because you can adjust the height of the long arm so that it's at a different level.
Mhm.
I do think it's a lot more difficult if you have mobility issues because you need to move with the long arm machine.
Oh, all right. Yeah,
Because
in my case,
yeah,
that's
you're if you're driving the machine, you're driving it to one side to the other.
Mhm.
So you need to be able to move with it. If you're renting a sit down machine, you can do everything that you want sitting down. That's not an issue when it comes to mobility.
all
But if
right.
you're looking to rent one that's on a frame, I think that it is probably a lot more difficult if you have mobility issues, whether
Yeah, that's what I
a
was worried
wheelchair or
about.
even if you can't stand long.
Russ,
Yeah,
I
see-
have a cutie frame
You
and a
do?
long arm on it. Yes. And I sit down and quilt because you're only covering about at max a 4-foot area. So you can sit and quilt that whole area without moving.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier if you are doing custom quilting because you
Yes.
can focus on smaller areas. If you're
Right.
following a pantograph, I think it's a lot more difficult to take
Well, you
a
have to
smaller
be
area.
behind the machine with that. I work
Yes.
strictly from the front. And it is very quiltable from a chair. But you do have to move side to side with your quilt. and front to back with your quilt on a cutie frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in other words, I to be honest, I'm in a power chair, so I don't
Yeah.
think I could.
So,
And even if I rented the time, then I know they talk, it takes a lot of hours to get to the point where you're doing a decent job on your own. So I'm wondering, I know they keep telling me that you need to spend 20, 30 minutes a day, an hour a day. But that's really not feasible if you're renting time.
It is a challenge at times to figure out when you can get the time that you need. So I
Okay.
do agree with that.
I'm thinking basically I really need to do a sit down, move the fabric.
Yeah. And like I said, that those are always an option. My local quilt shop, if I want to rent time on the long arm, I can rent the sit down machine, or I can rent the big machine.
Oh, you can rent a sit down machine then.
At my local quilt shop, yes, your mileage
Okay.
may vary.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Russ right now? These were
Russ,
good.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Do the sit-down machines have the same type of stitch regulation, stitch length regulation that a stand-up long arm would?
Many do. The one that's at my local quilt shop, you can run it in regulated mode, or you can run it in freeform mode to let it go however you want to go with the speed. I do like the idea of stitch regulators because you know you're going to get perfect width stitches. The problem with the regulators though is if you want to do like micro stippling, you have to make sure you turn that off so that you can get a more dense stitching.
You
Any
know,
other
I
questions?
didn't have a long-arm machine, so I was wondering. Yeah, there's no regulation. Never mind. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we thank Russ for this great presentation?
Question. I have two actually. How many machines did you try before you decided on the model that you got? And what made you decide on that model?
I can tell you that I have probably played with 7 or 8 different machines, whether it be through friends or through just playing a few minutes at a quilt show. The big reason why I settled on this machine was one, I had played with it and I knew that I liked it. 2, my local quilt shop is a handy quilter dealer, so they are a lot closer than the friend that I got it from if I need like immediate support. And the big reason was the price. I managed to, like I said, get this at a fairly deep discount. So if I had tried to go with a brand new machine, I probably would be a lot more in debt. So a lot of it, like I said, it came because it was offered to me at this moment in time. And I really did try to talk myself out of it because I knew I didn't have the space and I knew that I had bathroom remodels happening. So I had funds that needed to go there. But it's like yesterday, they were talking about $35 sewing machines. Sometimes you just got to go after it. I did not get my long arm for $35.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question. I've got a comment.
Yes, Linda.
As far as the quilt shops, I went to 2 different quilt shops. I took a class, and after I took the class, then I went and used their long arm. I was basically on my own after I took that class. Then I went to another quilt shop, which was totally different. She works with you the entire time. you do put the quilt on yourself, but she's there to assist you. And if you have any issues or problems, she works with you as you're doing it. So I think it really depends upon the quilt shop, and you just need to go and talk to them and see what their policies are or what they do.
Yeah,
Because
I agree with
those
that.
are completely different.
I
Yeah.
think it's silly for that one shop that says you're on your own, because you're borrowing their fairly expensive machine. You don't want them, you don't want to be responsible if you load something wrong, or if you miss a step and you're going to end up getting a less happy product in the end. So yeah, I would definitely, if you're going to rent a machine, make sure that the shop that you're renting the machine from gives you enough assistance until you are comfortable without doing it. It may get to the point you've done 10 or 12 quilts and you know how to load the long arm, you know how to advance it. So you're good with that. But always, even with your first handful of quilts, you need to make sure that you are guided, because you don't want to miss a step. You don't want to like forget to straighten out your fabric on the rollers, because if you get too far down and you forgot a step and you're a little bit messed up, that's going to make you less happy with your product.
Right. And the second shop I went to, the gal that works with the long arms, it was almost like being in somebody's home. And she was there, she was assisting you. She wasn't micromanaging you. And the other shop, after I took my class, then the one guy, he would be micromanaging. He was watching every little step I made, and which was very uncomfortable. The other shop, I was quite comfortable, and she just makes it really easy. So yeah, you just got to look at the shops and see what.
Yeah. And if you have multiple shops in your area, that always makes it better, because you can shop around.
Right.
One other question, Russ. One other question. If I have a Bernina, a 710, and it has a BSR. If I spent the time learning at home, just on small pieces, would the transition be easy enough to go to a shop and then use their sit-down type when
Yes.
I need to use a big quilt?
Yes,
I know
if
at
you're
home
going
I
for
could not-
sit down,
Right.
yes, because you're sitting down on your Bernina and you know the movements that you need to do with your hands to get the designs that you're looking for.
And it
So
would
the
be
movements that
easy
you're
enough
doing,
to make that transition.
yeah, it would be very easy to do the transition. The difference that you're going to have is you're going to have a lot more space in the local quilt shop at their sit down machine.
Mhm.
But again, your hand movements are going to be the exact same to do a feather from your Bernina to the bigger machine. If you tried to go from your Bernina moving it around to a long arm that's on a frame, that's a lot different with muscle memory, because everything is backwards.
Yeah.
When you're sitting down at a sit down machine. So that's harder to move to the other way. Some people can do it easily, some people can't. But if you're staying sit down to sit down, then it's a lot easier.
Thank you. You helped make my decision. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question for Russ, if that's okay. Did you ever, it's Shirley here, did you ever consider or try edge to edge in the hoop quilting with an embroidery machine?
I have heard that it can be done. I have not attempted it yet. When I got my embroidery machine, it was in my idea that I can do some sort of edge to edge in the hoop with it, especially on my baby quilts, but I hadn't gotten around to actually learning how to do that yet. It's something that I want to do. I don't know how intense it might be.
Yeah,
It might be something that'll be better whenever I decide to do smaller projects like mug rugs or something, because those will fit in the hoop, so I can do an edge to edge in the hoop a lot easier.
yeah, because I know a long arm is out of the question for me, and so are the other things. And when I got my machine, I did not realize that I could do that. And you can purchase designs and everything, but that's
Yep.
how I do all mine now. And I have done a California King in the hoop with my.
Really? That's impressive.
And Shirley is the only person I know who has successfully done that, because I've tried myself. I am hoping that come the next retreat, that I will have Shirley as a guest speaker to talk about how to go about doing that.
I would love to learn how to do that.
But
It's
yeah,
Thank you.
Stephen, I've had the same issue. I've tried and tried and tried and tried, and
Yep.
I just cannot get them to line up
no. But anyways, that
no
is
matter what I do.
going beyond the scope of Russ's presentation at the moment. And I do want to thank Russ very much for this. And if Russ is going to be hanging around for a little bit longer, then maybe you can do sort of your questions more there, because I'm going to end the recording. But before I do that, I want to thank Russ for this. Even though I own a long arm myself, I did learn some things from your presentation today as well, because
Thank
that's
you.
the thing with long arms. There is always something to learn. They are
Definitely.
not a plug and play kind of device. So thank you very much, Russ. This was very thorough, very informative, very interesting. And as I said, if anybody has further questions for Russ, then after I end the recording, feel free to ask him whatever. So thanks again, Russ, for this.
Thank you.
Thanks.